My fondness for westerns can likely be traced back to one of my favourite childhood toys. This little black cap gun I got for Christmas circa 1997. It looks a bit sorry for itself these days. A rubber band is the only thing holding the brake action together, and over 24 scuffs tell long forgotten stories of garden battles lost and won. Though obviously I don't play with it anymore, it's one of the few toys I've held onto for sentimental reasons. Maybe it helps remind me of my childhood and all the warmth that comes with those memories.
And there we go.
Red Dead Redemption 2 is frankly a miraculous game. It's a sprawling western crime drama with an unparalleled sense of place and attention to detail. I was totally enraptured with this game when I first played it. From the moment I strapped on my cowboy boots, I wouldn't take them off until my feet were calloused and imprinted with every inch of this digital Wild West. And throughout my travels, I was blown away by one singular moment. It wasn't a high-octane train robbery, nor was it a bloody Quentin Tarantino-inspired gunfight. It was going through the general store for the first time and looking at a tin of peaches. You see, every shop in Red Dead boasts numerous shelves of canned goods, hair pomades and ground coffee. All these wares are laid out before you, beckoning you towards them with their shiny labels and agreeable prices. In most other games, all this would purely serve as window dressing, immovable mise-en-scène to sell the illusion that you're in some old-timey shop. The thing about Red Dead 2, though, is that it always goes the extra mile. So imagine my surprise when I discovered that every single item in the store could be picked up and examined in excruciating detail. Giddily, I picked everything up so I could watch the light catch on the gold foil of chocolate bars and drink in the embellished fonts that proudly declare each product's branding name. It was only when I began looking at this can of peaches that the pennies started to drop. I realised that I'd seen all these things before. At least similar objects, tucked away in how they live sections of my childhood museums. But instead of being locked behind glass cabinets with do not touch stickers plastering every surface, here I could defy museum etiquette by reaching out and touching these digital exhibits, as if time never rusted their edges. It's not a big feature of Red Dead 2, yet holding these pieces of history put me in that museum mindset where we quietly consider the life story of every object. Once I had this microscopic revelation, I became inextricably aware of how Tactility and Transcendence bind all of Red Dead 2's core themes to capture a tone that few other games have replicated. In case you're unfamiliar with Red Dead Redemption 2, allow me to set the game's scene. You play as Arthur Morgan, an aging gunslinger and member of the Van der Linde gang, a travelling tribe of outlaws who desire to live in America as free folk. As the bad guys, you shoot, you loot, and generally get up to no good. But in between your heists and hijinks, you're pursued by Pinkertons, federal agents seeking to tame the Wild West and make your notorious gang conform to society. It's no coincidence this old versus new story is set in 1899, when mankind is knocking on the door of a new century. All the while, the American frontier is slowly ebbing away, a solemn truth that gradually comes into focus the more time you spend in this world. What also becomes apparent is that Red Dead 2 is a damn good western. It's a genre characterised by its shootouts and sayonaras, brought into popularity by the advent of film. Red Dead's writers are self-confessed movie buffs, and the game itself wears its cinematic influences on its sleeve. These aren't simply hollow homages though, as the game expresses a true understanding of its melancholic genre, all of which stems from the golden age of Hollywood, when the western was slowly becoming redefined by a handful of talented filmmakers. Of them, none of them were more popular and influential than this man.
Directed by John Ford. These words have appeared on over 135 movies.
6-time Oscar winner An habitual eye patch wearer, John Ford is perhaps one of the most celebrated American film directors, renowned nowadays for giving westerns a quality that elevated them above simple cowboy and Indian flicks. There was a nuance to his dialogue and occasional poetry in his filmmaking, though when it came to actually discussing his films, he was notoriously, shall we say, enigmatic?
Mr. Ford, you made a picture called Three Bad Men, which was a large-scale western, and you had a quite elaborate land rush in it.
Mm-hmm.
How did you shoot that?
With a camera.
His good friends often commented on how he buried his sentimentality with machismo, but his films quietly exposed his soft side. Though Ford uses the Old West as a backdrop to explore dozens of social and political topics, he was, in part, a romanticist. It's my personal view that he, like countless other directors, also used filmmaking as a link to his past, a means to reconnect with his youth when life seemed simpler. In the early chapters of Joseph McBride's biography on Ford, aptly titled Searching for John Ford, he explains that Ford was born in Maine to a family of Irish immigrants, and his formative years were during the turn of the century. As McBride eloquently explains, soon the gasoline engines would be taking the place of the draft horses and oxen that pulled carts and wagons in John's boyhood. Witnessing the old agrarian world changing before his eyes into the clamorous industrialised 20th century, John did not realise that he was finding one of the major themes that would preoccupy him throughout his adulthood. From his parents, who had seen the old world collapse around them before coming to America, he would have acquired a sense of regret and nostalgia for what is lost whenever society is transformed. He would try to recapture that lost paradise in his life, and more successfully, in his work. On screen, the painful sadness of Ford's nostalgia is exquisitely balanced with the consolations of memory. In his films, there's an innate sense of reverie for the scenery and community that would occupy his childhood. But his stories are compelling because they explore how his characters cope with periods of transition. Stagecoach is about a group of outcasts and misfits all hurtling towards new lives. My Darling Clementine is about how the law gradually wins over the heart of a once troubled town. And The Searchers is about a dusty curmudgeon trying to find a home amidst ever-shifting social values. In their own way, all of these films allude to the decline of the Old West and examine how individuals cope with being torn from the embrace of the American frontier to enter a new era of civilization. This notion has since become a mainstay of the genre, existing in the periphery of all the best westerns for several decades. Once again, this old versus new conflict drives Red Dead 2's narrative. What's interesting is how this theme permeates into several aspects of its gameplay. Funnily enough though, Red Dead Redemption 2 isn't content with just being a video game, it wants to be a cowboy simulator, and it achieves this primarily by slowing down and making you consider your pace of play. One of the very first things you'll notice once gaining control of Arthur is that everything takes a long time to do. Going from a stationary pose into a walk requires real wind-up and momentum. While looting homes, Arthur will rifle through individual cupboard doors and cabinets. And if you want to claim yourself a couple of animal pelts to make a quick buck, get ready to watch several unskippable skinning sequences. It's a gameplay style that's determined by character animation. Though slow, there's something undeniably voyeuristic and involving about this pace of play that ends up connecting you to its old-fashioned way of life. Arthur himself acts as our surrogate to interact with this digital version of the Old West, and pretty quickly you'll learn to love taking carefree walks up the high street and boiling fresh pots of coffee to warm yourself up on chilly mornings. The interactive nature of everything, blended with bespoke character animations, lends a tactility to the gameplay that submerges you into a time traveller fantasy, one where we marvel at this quaint way of life. It's this kind of painstaking attention to detail that's often, understandably, absent in other games, either for budgetary or design reasons. In Red Dead, everything has a home and is a tangible part of that location's DNA and heritage. Even tiny items are granted importance once a dedicated animation plays out upon interacting with it. Maybe this is why the tin of peaches caught me off guard. Watching the lumbering way Arthur reaches for it before rolling it around in his wrist, it's impossible not to notice the inordinate amount of attention it draws to itself. It felt bizarrely symbolic in a way that I couldn't quite put my finger on at the time, but the world feels all the richer by giving weight to the ordinary. This tactility doesn't exist on a purely aesthetic level though. It physically manifests in subtle ways during the two actions you'll arguably be doing the most of in Red Dead 2, horse riding and shooting. Mashing the A button while horseback is the quickest way to speed up your mare, but it drains their stamina rapidly. You can mitigate this however and ride much more efficiently if you time your button presses with your horse's gallop. Not only are you rewarded for learning your horse's nuances, these rhythmic button taps involve you in the act of riding throughout every journey Arthur makes across the landscape. On the shooting side, the vast majority of the game's weaponry lack modern conveniences and a single action. Functionally, this means that most guns require a whole extra trigger pull before a shot is fired. Press once to pull back the hammer, press again to shoot, every single time. It's a constant reminder that you're playing with antiquities, and it permits the player an additional level of creative freedom in how they interact with the world. Manually racking a shotgun before turning corners becomes second nature, and priming a revolver to intimidate a witness never fails to empower.
What are you hunting? An elephant?
I wish.
Guns are the tools of your trade, of course, so it makes sense that you grow attached to them. You might even go so far to spruce them up at the gunsmith. In a firefight, fancy engravings offer no tactical advantage. They're barely even visible in the heat of the moment. But even so, it feels important to us. Picking up your peacemaker from the workman's bench after spending ages choosing inlay colours for your engravings, you can't help but wonder who this gun's next owner could be. Red Dead 2's world is ruthless, and a free firearm can be prized from any dead man's fingers. A well-adorned weapon can serve as any gunslinger's epitaph. We weave Arthur's legacy on these workbenches. Is he a simple man who keeps it classic? Or is he a narcissist, embellishing his weapons with gold-plated triggers and overly ornate wood carvings? On these workbenches, you decide how the gun's next owner will think of Arthur. Your guns and your horse become cherished possessions that you take great pride in upkeeping. But Arthur's most treasured and dearest belonging is his journal. Here, Arthur keeps a staggeringly dense account of the game's events. Pages and pages and pages of handwritten notes chronicle Arthur's story. But in the margins and the occasional double-page spread, you'll be surprised to see sketches. Rudimentary, yet personal drawings, ranging from the fauna and flora he's discovered, to the people he's met, to the places he's been. Every single one apparently left such an impression on him that he felt compelled to record it, even if he can't articulate why. As one doodle so aptly reads, "Saw an old church, found it interesting, not sure why." So why does a grizzled outlaw keep such a detailed journal? Perhaps he senses the Wild West, his home, is fading away. By recording everything in perpetuity, he's found a way to keep a fragment of his past alive. More so than ever before, Arthur is beginning to regard everything as if he's looking at it for the first and last time. His journal offers a glimpse into his thought process, and in doing so, it influences how we see this version of America, one that's undergoing a grand period of transition.
Feels like things have changed. The whole world's changed. And they don't want folk like us no more.
You never have to look far in Red Dead 2 to spot a point where past, present and future converge. Ruins of an abandoned town stand just a few minutes' ride from a bustling commercial hub, and shining locomotives chug past once unmolested prairies. Slowly but surely, America is being transformed by civilization, and those who oppose this change are destined to fall by the wayside. Only decent, upstanding, law-abiding citizens have a space in this new world. Everyone else is branded as barbarians in the eyes of its peacekeepers.
I enjoy society, flaws and all. You people venerate savagery, and you will die savagely.
In fact, the history of savages conquered by society can even be traced back via the hierarchy of the enemy gangs you fight throughout the story. Starting with miscreant cowboys to the unsurrendered Confederate army, and ending with straight-up cannibals. The Pinkertons have systematically ousted these social undesirables to the desolate fringes of the countryside, and Arthur's brand of aging gunslingers are next on their chopping block. Even without the Pinkertons, mercenaries like Arthur are fast losing their intimidating status in the eyes of the public, as the everyday media erodes their influence.
Yeah, look at this. Gunslingers. Over here, circus freaks.
Tucked away in premium cigarette packets are collectible cards, some of which offer cleaned-up caricatures of famous gunslingers. Once feared outlaws look more like pantomime knights of the Round Table or characters from bedtime stories. And the few legends that are still living are drunkards and gamblers, haggard shells of their former selves who are a greater threat to themselves than society. The identity of Arthur and his fellow gunslingers have been reclaimed, defanged, and commercialised, just in time for the 20th century. The shadow cast by the end of an era looms over Arthur, all the while the noose around his neck gets tighter with every passing day. The passage of time is such an omnipresent force that you'll be reminded of it every time you look at Arthur's face. His real-time beard growth serves as a gaunt reminder that time only moves in a single direction. With the knowledge that the Old West is approaching extinction, and how you, as a player living in modern day, is experiencing this glimpse of the past vicariously through an unshaven virtual avatar, you start to look at things a little differently. Consider again the methodical, voyeuristic way which Red Dead 2 lets you examine objects. While rolling items around in Arthur's palms with silent fascination, everything feels holy. My mind returns once again to the tin of peaches. While controlling Arthur, we become digital archaeologists and begin marvelling at the graphic design of a tin of coffee or the typeface on newspapers. Look closer at these things though, and you may start to consider their story. How did this get here? Who will this belong to? And how does my lifetime compare with this? All of these introspective questions will be familiar to anyone who's ever compared their age with a museum artifact and felt humbled by the immortality of the inanimate. As players, our context of time affords this thought process, yet only a slither of this concept will occur in Arthur's mind. However, due to the transient nature of his world, he may begin to sense that some objects are fast becoming relics of a bygone era. Like packing down a childhood bedroom before heading to university, or clearing out the house of a grandparent who's passed away, every item we touch has a previously unsensed energy that lets us reflect on who we were, who we've become, and all that time in between. We consider our footing on time's spectrum before saying a tiny farewell to that fragment of ourselves that's forever lost to history. In Arthur's case, when he really starts to look around him, it's as if he's trying to drink in his world, its history and its texture, because he knows one day he'll have to say goodbye to it. Be it an event, a city, or a person, memory keeps things alive. And fortunately, Arthur's life doesn't pass by without witness. During your travels, you'll bump into some colourful characters and do some errands for them. Although they never quite belong to the kind of crowd Arthur associates himself with, that's exactly why these meetings resonate with him.
No, wait! Give me a minute of your life. I might just change it forever.
Each new face has the power to resummon old memories of our very own chance encounters that made lasting impressions. Perhaps it's an overly quirky taxi driver, a talkative train passenger, or a co-worker you only shared a single shift with. Where are these people now, we occasionally wonder. Crossing paths with these strangers makes Arthur's journey feel less insular. Some are kind enough to write you letters several in-game hours later, thanking you for their kindness, proof that you've touched their lives for the better. They all make an impression on Arthur too. Some of them even warrant spots in his beloved journal. Some of them even give you trinkets to remember them by. After resolving the woes of a larger-than-life travelling circus entertainer, a valuable emerald is offered as a reward. It can be sold to any shopkeeper for a high price, but I made a point of keeping hold of it. It morphed from a valuable treasure item into a personal keepsake of mine, greeting me like a lucky penny every time I opened my inventory, forever reminding me of that brief encounter. The game's very best side quest, The Inequities of History, explores how one man's possessions can bring nostalgic comfort, but some history is better left buried. It's a haunting reminder that those who hold on too tightly to the past will be consumed by that obsession. Arthur and his gang are on the precipice of that very same slippery slope. They're all dinosaurs in Stetsons, men out of time clinging onto the remnants of the ever-shifting American dream. How long will it be until their bustling camp will look just like all the other deserted settlements you find? What fragments of your history will be collected by curious scavengers? And what will be reclaimed by the earth? The trick Red Dead 2 manages to pull off is a subtle one. The game deeply integrates you into a world you can not only touch, but feel. You learn to love the slow pace of life, the freedom to ride around and do whatever you please. You get on board with the gang's plight to keep the Wild West wild, which is why it hurts all the more when you realise that your way of life is slowly dying out. What do we do then, when we know something won't last forever? We make our peace, say our goodbyes, and we record it. We make notes, we do sketches, and we hold keepsakes close to our chest so we can immortalise that feeling and pass them on to future generations. Just like John Ford making films about an era long gone and the ghosts of the people who lived there, we become architects of our own nostalgia, and we curate our own memory museums. We fill these imaginary halls with dog-eared journals, lint-covered emeralds, and rusted tins of peaches, because they're all that's left. Learning to let go and find satisfaction from memories and trinkets takes an emotional maturity, a quality that John Ford championed in his work.
I've always found that the little quiet little man that nobody pays any attention to has more guts and courage than the big blowhard, the big noisy, the big outspoken fellow. It's the little man that does the courageous thing.
Arthur is the quiet man in the corner. He is ever aware of transcendence in everything he sees and everything he touches, even if he doesn't have the words to articulate himself. Red Dead 2 is a game about engaging with an antiquated way of living, a game about forgotten communities and their distant folk songs, and a game about quietly considering the future while holding the past in the palm of your hands as it slips through your fingers.